The moment Nancy Pelosi called Tulsi Gabbard a useful idiot for Putin on live television, she made the mistake every corrupt politician eventually makes. She forgot that veterans don't scare easily, and they definitely don't forget when you disrespect their service to cover up your own corruption. Pelosi had arrived at the News Nation studios for America's Town Hall, like a queen returning to her kingdom. Designer suit worth $5,000, perfectly coiffed hair that cost more than most Americans spend on groceries in a month, and that practiced smile that said, "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, child." She'd come to put Tulsi in her place, as she'd apparently told her staff. She'd done it to countless younger politicians before. She had the experience, the gravitas, the power. This would be easy. Tulsi Gabbard had arrived with something different. An iPad loaded with stock trading records, photos of San Francisco's homeless crisis, and the bearing of someone who'd served in combat zones and didn't intimidate easily. She'd also brought something Nancy Pelosi had forgotten existed: integrity. What happened in the next 90 minutes would end Pelosi's 37-year reign and expose the biggest political protection racket in American history. If you've ever wondered what happens when a combat veteran meets a career politician who's gotten rich off insider trading, you're about to find out. And stick around for minute 34 when Tulsi pulls up Pelosi's stock portfolio. Nancy's face is worth 1,000 words. The studio was packed beyond capacity. America's Town Hall had been promoted for weeks as the future of the Democratic Party, a conversation between generations. The promotional materials showed side-by-side photos. Nancy Pelosi, the 84-year-old former speaker who'd held power for decades, and Tulsi Gabbard, the 43-year-old veteran and former congresswoman who'd left the Democratic Party entirely. The network had billed it as a respectful dialogue. What it really was, a confrontation between everything wrong with the establishment and everything that could make it right. The audience of 200 had been carefully selected to represent the split half Pelosi supporters, half Tulsi supporters, with a small contingent of undecideds to keep things interesting. The contrast was visible before anyone even spoke. Pelosi's section wore designer labels, expensive jewelry, the polished look of people who spent their lives in elite circles. Many worked in politics, media, or academia, the professional class that had thrived during Pelosi's reign. Tulsi's section was different: military veteran gear, American flag hats, working-class attire. Teachers, nurses, small business owners, and a surprising number of veterans who'd made the trip just to support one of their own. The set was designed to look intimate: two chairs angled toward each other on a small stage, a modern backdrop with America's Town Hall, emblazoned behind them, soft lighting meant to make everything feel conversational rather than confrontational. The production team had no idea how wrong their assumptions would be. Chris Cuomo, back in journalism after his CNN departure, and trying desperately to rebuild his credibility through fair moderation, sat at a small desk between the two chairs. He'd prepared questions about policy, about the direction of the Democratic Party, about finding common ground. He'd even rehearsed transitions to keep things civil. He looked nervous as the cameras did final checks, and he should have been. You don't moderate a meeting between a combat veteran and a career politician without expecting some explosions. Backstage, the contrast was even more stark. Nancy Pelosi's green room was a flurry of activity. 5 staffers coordinating talking points, a communications director working multiple phones, a media consultant reviewing potential attack lines, 2 assistants adjusting her appearance, and what appeared to be a crisis management specialist on standby, which should have been everyone's first clue. This would go poorly. Pelosi herself sat in the makeup chair getting final touches, sipping water from a crystal glass. reviewing note cards with her signature talking points highlighted in yellow. Remember, her chief of staff had told her before she walked out, she's attacked progressive values. She left the party. She's met with dictators. You have the moral high ground. Keep her on the defensive. Pelosi had nodded confident. She'd destroyed countless political opponents over 4 decades. This would be no different. Tulsi was younger, less experienced in these settings, and had made the mistake of attacking the Democratic establishment. Nancy would remind everyone why you don't challenge the Queen. Tulsi Gabbard's green room was quiet. Just her reviewing notes on her iPad, double-checking facts, verifying documentation. No entourage, no crisis team, no media consultants. Just a soldier preparing for combat the way soldiers do, with facts, with preparation, with the calm focus of someone who'd faced actual danger and found political theater far less intimidating. She'd worn her Army uniform that morning during her National Guard drill, then changed into civilian clothes for the broadcast. The discipline remained. "You ready for this?" a production assistant had asked nervously. Tulsi had smiled, not the political smile that so many practiced, but the real smile of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. "Always ready," she'd said, "because that's what 20 years of military service teaches you. Be prepared for anything. Stay calm under fire, and never go into battle without ammunition." Her ammunition tonight was simple: the truth. Documented, verified, undeniable. Nancy Pelosi walked out first to applause from her section and polite acknowledgement from others. She wore a burgundy suit that probably cost more than the average American's monthly rent. Later investigation would reveal it was a Giorgio Armani piece priced at $4,800. She wore a pearl necklace worth approximately $15,000, though she'd tell reporters it was just costume jewelry. Her American flag pin was positioned perfectly on her lapel, though the irony of that would become clear soon enough. She waved to the cameras with the practiced gesture of someone who'd done this thousands of times, smiled that smile she'd perfected over decades, warm but calculating, grandmotherly but sharp, and settled into her chair with the confidence of someone who'd sat in far more important chairs. She crossed her legs, adjusted her microphone, checked something on her notes, and looked up at the camera with the expression of someone ready to deliver a lecture to an errant student. Tulsi Gabbard walked out 30 seconds later to louder applause, much louder actually, which visibly annoyed Pelosi. She wore a simple dark blazer American flag pin that she'd actually earned the right to wear, and the composed bearing of someone who'd faced enemy fire and found political posturing far less intimidating. She nodded to the audience, made brief eye contact with Pelosi, who looked away first and sat down. Chris Cuomo introduced the format questions from the audience open discussion about the Democratic Party's direction. He barely finished his introduction before Nancy Pelosi was ready to attack. "Chris, before we start, I think it's important to address something." Pelosi said, that grandmother scolding the naughty child tone already deployed. "There are some people who claim to be Democrats, but whose actions suggest otherwise." "Oh, here we go," the audience thought collectively. "Some people," Pelosi continued, her voice taking on that grave, portentous quality, "who meet with dictators like Bashar al-Assad, who appear on Russian state television, who parrot Kremlin talking points, who question our intelligence community at every turn." She turned slightly to face Tulsi directly. "Some people who are frankly useful idiots for Putin and other adversaries of the United States." The room went silent. She'd just called a decorated combat veteran a useful idiot for Putin. On live television, in front of millions. Tulsi didn't flinch. In fact, she smiled slightly, the kind of smile a soldier gives right before engaging the enemy. She'd been waiting for this. Nancy had clearly had too much of that $13 a pint ice cream before the show. Chris Cuomo looked panicked. This had gone nuclear in the first minute. "Madam Speaker, that's a serious accusation." "It's also complete nonsense," Tulsi said calmly, her voice steady and clear. "But I'm glad you brought it up, Nancy, because I think we should talk about who's been useful to foreign interests." Pelosi's smile tightened slightly. That wasn't supposed to be the response. "I served in Iraq," Tulsi continued, still calm, still composed. "I'm currently a lieutenant colonel in the Army National Guard. I've held a security clearance for 20 years. I've deployed to combat zones where people were actively trying to kill me." She paused. Let that sink in. "You just called me a useful idiot for Putin. That's not just an insult to me. That's an insult to every service member who's deployed, who's served, who's put their life on the line. So let's talk about who's been useful to foreign interests, shall we?" She pulled out her iPad, tapped a few buttons, and a timeline appeared on the studio's main screen. "You've made multiple trips to China. Your district has the largest Chinese-American population outside of Asia. That's not a criticism, it's a fact. But let's talk about your policy positions on China." Images appeared on screen: Pelosi in China, meeting with officials smiling for cameras. Consistently soft on China, despite their human rights abuses, their treatment of Uyghurs, their aggression toward Taiwan. Why could it have anything to do with your son's business dealings in China or your husband's investments in Chinese companies? Pelosi tried to interrupt. "My family's business is separate." "Is it?" Tulsi cut her off. "Because your husband Paul seems to have remarkable timing on investments in companies you regulate. But we'll get to that." She switched images on the screen. "You called me useful to Putin. I questioned our involvement in Syria because I saw what happened in Iraq. I saw what our regime change wars did. I watched friends die for WMDs that didn't exist. I came back and said, maybe we should think carefully before toppling governments." Her voice was harder now. "That's not being useful to Putin. That's being useful to American families who don't want their kids dying in pointless wars. That's being useful to veterans who are tired of seeing their friends killed for no good reason." She leaned forward. "You've been in Congress for 37 years. You've voted for every war, every intervention, every escalation. But you never served. You never deployed. You never put on a uniform. You sent other people's kids to die while your net worth went from $40 million to over $250 million. The audience was completely silent now. "So you want to talk about who's useful, to whom I'm useful to Americans who want honest foreign policy. You're useful to defense contractors who profit from endless wars. I'm useful to families who want their kids home. You're useful to yourself." She sat back. "And I'm definitely not an idiot. Unlike someone who thought showing off $13 a pint ice cream during a pandemic was good optics." The audience erupted applause gasps, a few boos from Pelosi's section, but they were drowned out. Pelosi's face was flushed, her carefully practiced composure cracking. She called a combat veteran useful idiot, then got destroyed. Share if you're tired of career politicians attacking those who actually served. Chris Cuomo, trying desperately to regain control, attempted to move to his prepared questions. "Let's discuss economic policy and how the Democratic Party can better serve—" "I'd love to discuss economics," Tulsi interrupted. "Specifically, Nancy's unusual success in the stock market." Nancy's eyes narrowed. "I don't think my personal finances are—" "You're a public servant," Tulsi said flatly. Your finances are absolutely relevant, especially when they show a pattern of what looks suspiciously like insider trading. Nothing scares a politician like a spreadsheet they thought was buried. Tulsi tapped her iPad and a chart appeared on screen. It showed Paul Pelosi's stock trades over the past 4 years with markers indicating major legislative events. Your husband, Paul, is quite the investor, Tulsi said. Remarkable timing. Let me walk through some interesting patterns. The chart zoomed in on specific trades. December 18, 2020. Paul buys $1 million in Tesla. Call options. That's a bet that Tesla stock will go up. 3 weeks later, January 7, 2021, the Biden administration announces a massive electric vehicle infrastructure plan. Tesla stock soars. Your husband's profit over $500,000. Pelosi started to speak, but Tulsi continued. June 18, 2021. Paul buys $4 million in big tech stocks. Apple, Microsoft, Google. July 1st, the House Judiciary Committee, which you had enormous influence over, holds hearings on antitrust legislation targeting big tech. That legislation mysteriously gets shelved. Tech stocks rally. Paul's profit, $1.8 million. More data appeared on screen, each trade highlighted. July 12, 2022. This one's my favorite. Paul buys millions in semiconductor stocks. NVIDIA, AMD, Intel. Huge positions. 3 weeks later, the CHIPS Act passes. That's the $52 billion subsidy to semiconductor manufacturers. You voted yes. You pushed for it. NVIDIA hits record highs. Paul's profit, $3.2 million. But she looked up from the iPad. Every single trade, perfectly timed, around legislation you voted on, around bills you influenced, around policies you controlled. The audience was leaning forward, riveted. Your husband has the timing of an Olympic sprinter and the luck of a lottery winner. Except it's not luck when your wife controls the legislation affecting those companies. Pelosi tried her prepared defense. My husband makes his own investment decisions. I have no involvement in. He makes them based on companies you regulate, Tulsi interrupted, while you're voting on bills that affect their stock price. Come on, Nancy, we're not idiots. She pulled up more trades, showed a spreadsheet with dozens of entries. Between 2019 and 2023, Paul made over 40 trades that aligned almost perfectly with your legislative activities. 40. The odds of that happening by chance are astronomical. She set down the iPad and looked directly at Pelosi. Martha Stewart went to prison for insider trading. She made $45,000. Your husband has made millions. The only difference, congressional immunity and better lawyers. Pelosi's voice was tight. The rules allow spousal investments. The rules were written by people like you to protect people like you, Tulsi shot back. And when members of both parties tried to ban congressional stock trading, 76% public support, you opposed it. You said, and I quote, "We're a free market economy." She leaned forward. Free market. You're not in a free market. You're playing poker, where you get to see everyone's cards and they can't see yours. That's not capitalism. That's corruption. The data came back up on screen, the net worth progression. You started with about $40 million when you became Speaker. Now you have over $250 million. That's a 25% increase. The S&P 500 went up 400% in the same period. You beat the market by a 125 percentage points. She shook her head slowly. Professional hedge fund managers can't beat the market consistently. The best investors in the world can't do it. But you did. Why? Because you're not investing. You're insider trading with congressional immunity. Her final line was delivered with contempt. "You're not representing working families, Nancy. You're using them as cover while you get rich. That's not public service. That's a protection racket." $250 million net worth on a congressional salary. Every trade perfectly timed. Comment "insider" if you think this is corruption. Pelosi tried to recover by pivoting to her record. "Whatever you may think of my finances, I'm proud of my record representing San Francisco for 37 years. "Let's talk about San Francisco," Tulsi interrupted, and there was something almost eager in her tone. "I have photos." She tapped her iPad and images appeared on the studio screen. Tourism brochures don't show this side of Nancy's success story. The first image showed a tent encampment stretching down an entire city block. The second showed open-air drug use, people hunched over with needles, pipes, drug paraphernalia scattered on the sidewalk. The third showed what was clearly human feces on a downtown street. The image was blurred for television, but the context was obvious. The fourth showed boarded-up storefronts, for lease signs, businesses that had clearly been abandoned. The audience gasped. Some looked away. Others leaned in horrified. "This is San Francisco," Tulsi said quietly. "Your district. The place you've represented for 37 years. She pulled up statistics to accompany the images. Homeless population up 47% during your tenure. Not down, not stable. Up. Fentanyl deaths up 400% since 2018. Property crime so bad that major retailers are fleeing the city. Walgreens closed 17 stores. Target closed multiple locations. Whole Foods reduced hours because of theft and safety concerns." More images cycled through, each one more devastating than the last. Cost of living, highest in the nation. Working families have been priced out completely. The median home price is $1.4 million. Teachers, nurses, police officers, they can't afford to live in the city they serve. She looked at Pelosi. "You know what San Francisco has that other cities don't? Poop maps. Actual smartphone apps so people can navigate around human feces on the sidewalk." She pulled up the app on her iPad, showed it on screen. The audience saw a map of downtown San Francisco with dozens of markers indicating reported human waste. "That's your legacy, Nancy. Not innovation, not progress. Poop maps." Some in the audience laughed nervously. Others looked ill. "Where do you live in San Francisco, Madam Speaker?" Pelosi's jaw tightened. "I don't see how that's relevant." "Pacific Heights," Tulsi answered for her. "Pacific Heights, a $25 million mansion, behind security gates, with private security guards." An image appeared on screen, Pelosi's house visible from the street. Massive, beautiful, completely different from the images of homelessness that had preceded it. "Your neighborhood doesn't have poop maps. Your street doesn't have tent cities. Your neighbors aren't stepping over needles, because you've insulated yourself from the consequences of your policies." Tulsi stood up, a rare move that made everyone pay attention. "You've had 37 years to fix this. 37 years. You've had billions in federal funding. You've had total control of San Francisco politics. And what happened?" She gestured to the images still on screen. "It got worse. Dramatically worse. The homeless crisis exploded. The drug epidemic devastated communities. Crime drove away businesses. Working families were forced out." She pointed at Pelosi. "And your net worth went up, while your district went down, while people suffered, while families lost hope. You got richer." Her voice was rising now, military command voice breaking through. I deployed to Iraq. I saw real problems, real suffering, people living in terrible conditions. But at least we were trying to fix things. We were there to help, even if we didn't always succeed. She walked closer to Pelosi's chair. What's your excuse? You've had 4 decades and unlimited resources. You've had power beyond what most politicians ever dream of. And this, she pointed to the screen, is what you've accomplished. She returned to her seat. Your district is a disaster. Your constituents are suffering. But your mansion is beautiful, and your net worth is higher than ever. That's not representation. That's extraction. You extracted wealth while they got poverty. She looked at the camera. 37 years. This is the result. Remember it. 37 years representing San Francisco. This is the result. Share if you think her district deserves better leadership. Chris Cuomo, seeing the interview spiraling completely out of his control, tried once more to steer things. Let's discuss January 6th and threats to democracy. Yes, let's. Pelosi jumped in, clearly relieved to be on what she thought was safe ground. The insurrection showed us that democracy is fragile, and we must. Let's discuss your role on January 6th. Tulsi interrupted. Pelosi's expression changed. This wasn't supposed to be the direction. She'd used J6 as a weapon for years. Time to turn it around. You controlled House security that day. Correct, Tulsi asked. Security decisions are made by professionals by the sergeant at arms, who reports to you, who you appoint, who you control. Yes or no, you controlled House security through the sergeant at arms. Pelosi hesitated. The Speaker has oversight, but, thank you, so you had control. Tulsi pulled up documents on screen. January 4th, 2021. 2 days before the certification of the Electoral College. The Capitol Police submit a request for 10,000 National Guard troops to be pre-deployed. They cite intelligence about potential violence. They request backup. The document appeared on screen, official Capitol Police letterhead, the request clearly visible. That request goes to House Sergeant at Arms Paul Irving, who reports to you. The request was denied. Why? Those are complex security decisions. Wiped Tulsi pressed. The FBI had intelligence briefings about potential violence. Capitol Police said they needed backup. January 6th was a known flashpoint. Why deny the National Guard? Pelosi had no good answer. She tried deflection. In hindsight, perhaps different decisions could have been made. In hindsight, Tulsi's voice was sharp. The intelligence was beforehand. The warnings were beforehand. The request was beforehand. This wasn't hindsight. This was foresight you ignored. She pulled up another document. After January 6th, you created a committee to investigate. That committee subpoenaed communications from everyone. Trump's team, Republican members, staff members, security officials, everyone. She paused. Except you. Where are your communications from January 6th? Your phone records, your text messages, your emails about security decisions? The silence was deafening. Lost in a phone upgrade, Tulsi quoted. That was your excuse. Your phone records from the day of a major security failure were lost in a phone upgrade. She shook her head slowly. The committee you controlled investigated everyone except you. Subpoenaed everyone except you. Scrutinized everyone's decisions except yours. She listed the uninvestigated questions. Why did you deny National Guard deployment? What did you know about security threats? When did you know it? What communications did you have about security that day? Why were those communications deleted? She leaned forward. You had one job on January 6th. Keep the Capitol secure. You failed. Then you deleted evidence of that failure. Then you spent 2 years investigating and prosecuting everyone else while exempting yourself from scrutiny. Her final line was delivered with disgust. That's not leadership, Nancy. That's cowardice. That's a cover-up. She denied National Guard, deleted phone records, then blamed everyone else. Share if you think she should have been investigated. Chris Cuomo, looking shell-shocked, tried once more. Director Gabbard, excuse me. Lieutenant Colonel Gabbard, let's discuss connecting with working Americans. Oh, Nancy connects with working Americans, Tulsi said with a slight smile. She just does it from behind a $25,000 refrigerator. The audience laughed. Even some of Pelosi's supporters couldn't help it. This was going to be fun. March 2020, Tulsi said, pulling up a video clip. Late-night television, middle of the pandemic, lockdowns, economic collapse. Let's watch. The clip played Nancy Pelosi on The Late Late Show with James Corden giving viewers a tour of her kitchen. The camera panned across commercial-grade appliances, marble countertops, and then there, it was a massive sub-zero refrigerator. Pelosi opened it with a flourish, revealing multiple pints of Genie's splendid ice creams. I don't know what I would have done without ice cream, Video Pelosi said cheerfully. My freezer is full of chocolate. The studio audience watching now was silent. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked angry. Let me remind everyone what was happening that week, Tulsi said as the clip ended. March 2020. The week that interview aired, 3.3 million Americans filed for unemployment. The largest spike in American history. She pulled up statistics. Small businesses were shutting down, not pivoting to takeout, not reducing hours, shutting down forever. Restaurant owners were crying in empty dining rooms because they'd spent their life savings building something, and it was gone. Hair salons closed, retail stores closed, family businesses that had been open for generations gone. She looked at Pelosi. And you were on television showing off $13 a pint ice cream in a $25,000 refrigerator, reading the labels, talking about flavor profiles, while America was losing everything. She pulled up another video, the now infamous salon footage from August 2020. Then there's this, August 2020. You needed a haircut. Understandable. We all did. But salons were closed by lockdown orders. Orders you vocally supported on every news show. The security camera footage played Nancy Pelosi walking through E-Salon in San Francisco, no mask, getting her hair done indoors, while every other salon in California was barred from operating. When you got caught, you didn't apologize. You blamed the salon owner, a small business owner, in your district, who you'd forced to close. You called it a setup. Tulsi's voice was hard now. That woman was facing bankruptcy. She'd lost 6 months of income because of lockdown orders. She took one appointment from you, the Speaker of the House, and you blamed her when you got caught. She pulled up more images, Pelosi's private jet usage records. Then there's climate change. You lecture Americans about their carbon footprint, about taking the bus, about reducing emissions, but you fly private everywhere. Congressional records show dozens of private flights. You burn more carbon in one trip than most families do in a year. The pattern was clear on screen, private jet after private jet, while Pelosi publicly supported the Green New Deal. Rules for thee, but not for me. That's your philosophy. Lockdowns for everyone else but you get your hair done. Climate sacrifice for everyone else but you fly private. Economic suffering for everyone else but you have $13 ice cream. She leaned forward. I deployed to Iraq. I lived in military barracks. I ate MRE's meals ready to eat for months. I wore the same uniform for weeks. I showered in group facilities. I slept on a cot. That's what service looks like. She pointed at Pelosi. What you do, that's not service. That's exploitation. You lecture from your mansion about sacrifice. You preach equality from your private jet. You talk about working people while you've never known a day of actual work in your life. Her final comparison was devastating. Marie Antoinette supposedly said, "Let them eat cake." She lost her head in the French Revolution. You said, "Let them eat ice cream," and made sure it cost $13 a pint, so working families couldn't afford it. She sat back. Americans are smarter than the French peasants. We don't need a revolution. We just vote out hypocrites. $13 ice cream while Americans lost everything. Private jets while lecturing on climate. Like and share if you're tired of hypocrite elites. Pelosi was visibly frustrated, now her composure completely shattered. She tried one more time to take the moral high ground. Whatever you may think, I have always respected the dignity of the office and the institutions of our democracy. Dignity, Tulsi interrupted, and she was almost laughing now. Like when you ripped up the State of the Union address. She queued up the video, and it played on screen. Everyone had seen it, but watching it again in this context was different. There was Nancy Pelosi sitting behind President Trump during the State of the Union address. As Trump finished his speech, Pelosi stood, picked up her copy of the address, and systematically tore it in half. Then she tore each half again, all on camera, all planned. You could see her checking before the speech that the pages would tear cleanly. She'd practiced. This never gets old. Watch closely, she pre-ripped the pages. Let me remind everyone what was in that speech, Tulsi said as the clip ended. President Trump recognized Stacy, a second-grade student and cancer survivor. He talked about her battle with cancer, her recovery, her family's struggle. You ripped that up. She pulled up the speech transcript. He honored Charles McGee, one of the last surviving Tuskegee Airmen, a 100-year-old hero who'd served in World War II. You ripped that tribute up. The audience was silent, many looking disgusted. He talked about a military family's reunion, about economic growth, about opportunity, and you sat behind him waiting for the cameras, and you ripped it up. Tulsi pulled up the legal code. That wasn't just paper, Nancy. That was an official government document, 18 U.S. Code Section 2T71, destruction of official government records. The penalty, disqualification from holding office. She let that sink in. But you're still here. You faced no consequences. Why? Because you have power. She began listing Pelosi's greatest hits of disrespect. You called President Trump morbidly obese. You mocked him repeatedly on television. You refused to call him President Trump, always just Trump or the president. You held up COVID relief for months because you didn't want him to get a political win before the election. You admitted that to donors. You impeached him twice on purely partisan votes. She shook her head. You lecture about norms, about respect, about civility, about dignity. But you've shown none of those things. You ripped up a speech about a cancer survivor's recovery. You desecrated a tribute to a Tuskegee Airman. For what? For cameras. For applause from your base. For your ego. Tulsi's voice was hard as steel now. I was deployed when Trump was president. I disagreed with him on many things. I questioned his policies. I voted against some of his proposals. But I would never disrespect the office like you did." She leaned forward one last time. That wasn't resistance. That wasn't bravery. That was an entitled politician who thinks rules don't apply to her. You violated federal law on live television, destroyed a government document, and faced zero consequences because you're Nancy Pelosi. Her final line was delivered with contempt. That's not democracy, Nancy. That's oligarchy. That's aristocracy. That's everything the founders warned us about. She ripped up the SOTU during tribute to cancer survivor and Tuskegee Airman. Comment disgraceful if you remember this moment. Chris Cuomo, seeing they'd gone well over time, but knowing this was television gold, made one final attempt at moderation. We're near the end of our time. I'd like to give both of you a chance for final thoughts. Madam Speaker, would you like to— I've dedicated my life to public service, Pelosi began, her voice shaky, now her composure completely gone. Stop, Tulsi said. Not loud, not shouted, just firm. Just stop. The room went silent. Tulsi stood up only the second time she'd stood during the entire debate, and everyone knew that meant this was the finale. You've spent this entire hour attacking my service, my patriotism, my loyalty. You called me useful idiot for Putin. You questioned my commitment to America. You implied I was some kind of traitor. She walked to the center of the stage, positioning herself between Pelosi and the cameras. So let's compare our service, directly, point by point. Let America decide who's the real public servant. She began, and her voice had the cadence of someone delivering a formal report. I enlisted in the Army National Guard in 2003. After 9/11. When my country needed soldiers, I raised my hand. I deployed to Iraq in 2004. Combat zone, mortars, IEDs, real danger, real service. I deployed to Kuwait in 2008. More service in a hostile environment. I've served in uniform for over 20 years. I'm still serving. Lieutenant Colonel, still drilling, still ready to deploy if called. She paused, let that record speak for itself. I gave up civilian opportunities to serve. I've missed birthdays, holidays, family events. I've left safety and comfort to serve in dangerous places. That's what service looks like. She turned to face Pelosi directly. Your turn, Nancy. Tell us about your service. Pelosi opened her mouth, but nothing came out. You've been in Congress for 37 years, Tulsi continued. But you never served in uniform, never deployed, never put on body armor, never missed Christmas because you were in a war zone. Your service has been entirely in Washington, D.C., one of the wealthiest cities in America. She pulled up the financial comparison on screen one more time. Your net worth when you entered Congress, approximately $40 million. Your net worth now, over $250 million. That's more than a 500% increase. She let the numbers speak. I make my congressional salary. That's it. I don't trade stocks based on votes I'm going to make. I don't have a husband who miraculously times his investments perfectly around legislation I control. I don't live in a $25 million mansion. I don't fly private jets. I serve. You profit. She walked back toward her chair but didn't sit. Your district, San Francisco, the place you've represented for 37 years, is a disaster. Homeless crisis, drug epidemic, crime, businesses fleeing, working families priced out. But your neighborhood, Pacific Heights, beautiful, clean, safe, protected by gates and guards. She gestured to the screens showing the earlier images. You denied security on January 6th. People died. You deleted evidence. Then you spent 2 years blaming everyone except yourself. She listed each point, counting on her fingers. You showed off luxury during a pandemic while Americans suffered. You violated lockdown rules you imposed on others. You blamed a small business owner when you got caught. You ripped up official documents on television. You used your position to enrich yourself and your family for decades. She stopped counting, let her hands drop. So tell me, Nancy, who's the real public servant? The one who wore a uniform in combat, or the one who wore designer suits to cocktail parties? The one who risked her life for her country, or the one who got rich off her country? The contrast was devastating. The choice was obvious. You called me useful idiot. You questioned my patriotism. But let's look at the record. She spoke directly to the camera now. I've never gotten rich off my position. Never ignored my constituents while enriching myself. Never destroyed evidence to cover my failures. Never lived in luxury while preaching equality. Never lectured working people about sacrifice while flying private jets and eating $13 ice cream. She turned back to Pelosi. I serve in uniform. You serve yourself. I tell hard truths even when they're unpopular. You tell comfortable lies from positions of power. I sacrifice. You profit. She delivered her final verdict. You're everything wrong with Washington, Nancy. Career politician, insider trader, limousine liberal, champagne socialist. You lecture working people from your mansion. You preach sacrifice while living in luxury. You attack veterans who question policy while you've never served anything except your own interests. Pelosi tried to speak, her voice cracking. That's not, You've always served yourself, Tulsi finished. The stock trades prove it. San Francisco proves it. The ice cream video proves it. The ripped speech proves it. January 6th proves it. Everything proves it. She walked back to her chair and sat down composed, mission accomplished. I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me. It became the party of Nancy Pelosi, the party of insider trading and luxury lifestyles and preaching equality while living like aristocrats. The party that lectures veterans about patriotism while getting rich off the system. She looked at the camera one final time. Americans can decide who's the real public servant, the veteran who sacrificed or the politician who profited. I trust their judgment. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then someone in the audience started clapping. Then another. Then dozens. Then most of the audience, even some who'd come supporting Pelosi, were on their feet. Chris Cuomo had completely lost control of the broadcast, but he didn't care. This was history. Pelosi sat frozen in her chair, unable to respond. She couldn't defend the stock trades, they were documented. She couldn't defend San Francisco, the photos had spoken for themselves. She couldn't defend the ice cream, or the salon, or the ripped speech, they were all on video. She couldn't defend her net worth, or her mansion, or her lifestyle. They were matters of public record. She had nothing left. Her 37-year career had just ended in 90 minutes on live television. The cameras captured everything. Her face drained of color, her hands trembling slightly. The moment when power met truth and lost. The video hit the internet before Tulsi and Nancy had even left the building. By the time their cars pulled away from the studio, clips were already trending. Useful idiot was #1 on Twitter within 20 minutes. The stock trading segment had 8 million views in the first hour. The San Francisco photos were being shared across every platform. By midnight, 47 million views across all platforms. By 24 hours, 89 million views. By 96 hours, 156 million views, making it one of the most watched political confrontations in American history. The hashtags told the story: #Pelosi exposed, #stock trading Nancy, #real public service, #useful idiot, but turned against Pelosi. Let them eat ice cream. They trended for 8 consecutive days. Fox News played clips on loop for a week. Gabbard destroys Pelosi with facts ran for 72 straight hours in some form. They brought in financial analysts to examine the stock trades. Every single one confirmed Tulsi's allegations were accurate. They brought in military veterans to discuss the useful idiot comment, universal condemnation of Pelosi. CNN tried damage control. Context needed. Pelosi's record under attack was their angle. But their own anchors looked uncomfortable defending the stock trades. Anderson Cooper, to his credit, said on air, "Look, the trades they're troubling. The timing is suspicious. I don't know how you defend this." Jake Tapper was even blunter. "If this were any Republican, we'd be demanding investigations." MSNBC tried the hardest to defend Pelosi. Joy Reid called it misogyny disguised as oversight. The panel on Morning Joe tried to pivot to Tulsi's past statements, but even MSNBC's audience wasn't buying it. The comments on their YouTube uploads were brutal: defend the stock trades or admit she's corrupt. This isn't about gender, it's about corruption. Stop defending the indefensible. Independent media exploded. Joe Rogan had Tulsi on his podcast. The episode got 34 million views in a week. Breaking Points did a deep dive into every trade Tulsi had cited, all verified. The Young Turks, usually hostile to Tulsi, had a segment where they admitted, "On the stock trading, she's right. This is corruption." International coverage was extensive. The BBC ran it as "American political icon's career ends in corruption scandal." The Guardian. Pelosi's district, 37 years of progressive policy, disastrous results. Even Al Jazeera covered it. U.S. politicians' wealth raises questions about system. Nancy Pelosi's office was silent for 36 hours. No statement, no press release, no tweets. Her staffers, when asked by reporters, had no comment. The silence was deafening. When she finally tweeted, it was weak. Tonight's partisan attacks ignore decades of real accomplishments for the American people. I'm proud of my record and will continue fighting for working families. The replies were savage. Over 80,000 comments in the first hour, maybe 5% supportive. The rest were brutal: address the stock trades or resign. What about San Francisco? Blame the homeless crisis. Real accomplishments like getting rich, fighting for families from your $25 million mansion. Your net worth is $250 million. How? Useful idiot, look in a mirror. You owe Tulsi and every veteran an apology. Conservative commentators had a field day. Nancy Pelosi just learned you don't attack someone who's actually served their country. Liberal commentators mostly went silent. What could they say? The stock trades were documented. San Francisco's crisis was real. The ice cream video existed. She got ratioed so hard that political analysts started using it as a textbook example of losing control of the narrative. Media studies professors would later teach this as a case study in how not to respond to a scandal. The political fallout was swift and devastating. Within 48 hours, 3 separate ethics complaints were filed by Republican members, by government watchdog groups, and surprisingly by a group of progressive Democrats who said, "Corruption is corruption, regardless of party." The SEC announced it was reviewing congressional stock trading patterns. The House Ethics Committee, under pressure, said it would examine the allegations. 2 progressive primary challengers announced they were running against Pelosi in 2026. One was a union organizer who'd lived in the Tenderloin, San Francisco's homeless epicenter. His announcement video featured the same photos Tulsi had used. Nancy lives in Pacific Heights. I live where her policies failed. Time for real representation. Polling showed Pelosi's approval rating in California dropped 34 points in 2 weeks, from 52% approve, 38% disapprove, to 18% approve, 72% disapprove. In her own district, she was underwater. 31% approve, 61% disapprove. Major donors started distancing themselves. Tech executives who'd been reliable Pelosi supporters suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Hollywood money dried up. Even labor unions traditionally loyal to Pelosi started hedging their bets. Within a week, Pelosi announced she would not seek any leadership positions in the Democratic caucus. "I will remain in Congress to serve my constituents, but it's time for a new generation of leadership." In Washington speak, that meant, "I've been forced out, and I'm trying to save face." Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, gave a carefully worded statement praising Pelosi's historic service, while pointedly not defending her against the allegations. No other Democratic leaders came to her defense. The message was clear: you're on your own. The cultural impact went beyond politics. "Useful idiot" became a boomerang phrase. Whenever someone made an accusation, the response became, "Who's the real useful idiot?" Tulsi had turned Pelosi's attack into a weapon against corruption everywhere. Stock trading memes proliferated. Images of Pelosi with stock charts captioned, "Better than Warren Buffett," Nancy's face photoshopped onto the Monopoly man. Paul Pelosi as a psychic, he can see the future, or his wife's calendar. "Let them eat ice cream" appeared on T-shirts, coffee mugs, protest signs. It became shorthand for elite hypocrisy everywhere. Military veterans rallied around Tulsi. VFW posts, American Legion halls, veterans organizations, they all shared the video, praised her defense of service, condemned Pelosi's "useful idiot" comment. Tulsi's standing among veterans already high became ironclad. 3 weeks after the debate, 60 Minutes did a special investigation into congressional stock trading. They examined Pelosi's trades in detail. Conclusion: while we found no evidence of illegal activity due to congressional exemptions, the pattern of trades raises serious ethical questions that demand reform. Even 60 Minutes long, seen as friendly to Democrats, couldn't defend it. The San Francisco Chronicle, Pelosi's hometown paper, ran a devastating series, 37 Years a District's Decline. They examined homelessness, crime, drugs, cost of living. All of it had gotten worse during Pelosi's tenure. The conclusion was damning. Representative Pelosi's national political success came at the expense of her district's well-being. 1 month after the debate, legislation to ban congressional stock trading passed the House 352-73. Pelosi voted no, one of only 73. The optics were terrible. "She's voting to protect her corruption," the headlines read. 2 months after the debate, Nancy Pelosi announced she would not seek re-election in 2026. "After much reflection and discussion with my family, I've decided it's time to step aside and let new voices lead." I'm proud of my 4 decades of service, and I leave with no regrets. The statement was carefully worded, but everyone knew the truth. She'd been forced out. The debate had ended her career. Tulsi Gabbard became a political phenomenon. Her approval rating among independents jumped 41 points. Republicans who'd been skeptical embraced her. Even Democrats, especially younger progressive Democrats tired of the establishment, gave her credit for calling out corruption. She was invited to speak everywhere. Universities, even liberal ones, veterans groups, town halls, podcasts, cable news. Everyone wanted to hear from the veteran who'd taken down an icon. The debate fundamentally changed the conversation about political corruption. It showed that documentation could defeat power, that facts could overcome institutional protection, that a prepared opponent with receipts could destroy even the most entrenched politician. Most importantly, it answered a question millions had been asking: who are the real public servants in Washington? Not the career politicians who get rich while their districts collapse. The veterans who sacrifice. This wasn't Republican versus Democrat. This wasn't conservative versus liberal. This wasn't even about ideology or policy positions. This was about service versus self-service, sacrifice versus profit, truth versus power. Nancy Pelosi spent 37 years building a political empire. She accumulated wealth, a 525% increase in net worth. She accumulated power, Speaker of the House, one of the most powerful positions in America. She accumulated influence, the ability to make or break careers with a word. But she forgot something fundamental. Public service requires sacrifice. Real leadership requires putting constituents first. True representation means sharing the consequences of your policies. She lived in a $25 million mansion while her district descended into chaos. She flew private jets while lecturing about climate change. She showed off $13 ice cream while Americans lost everything in a pandemic. She got rich off suspiciously timed stock trades while voting on legislation affecting those same stocks. She denied security on January 6th, then deleted evidence and blamed everyone else. She thought she was untouchable. She thought her power would protect her. She thought she could attack a combat veteran with impunity. She was wrong. Tulsi Gabbard did what needed doing. She didn't just criticize, she documented. She didn't just attack, she proved. She brought stock trading records. She showed photos of San Francisco. She cited specific dates, specific trades, specific failures. And she asked the simple question that destroyed Pelosi's career. Who's the real public servant? The veteran who deployed to combat zones, or the politician who got rich in Washington? The one who sacrificed, or the one who profited? The one who wore a uniform, or the one who wore designer suits? America answered that question. The 156 million views answered it. The plummeting approval ratings answered it. The forced retirement answered it. Real public servants sacrifice. Fake ones profit. If you think politicians who get rich off insider trading while their districts collapse should face consequences, share this story. Comment, real service, if you know the difference between wearing a uniform and wearing designer suits. Because Tulsi Gabbard showed us what real public service looks like. And in doing so, she exposed what Nancy Pelosi really was, not a public servant at all. Just a politician who served herself.